Taylor, a fiery college activist, was certain she could call out Barron Trump for wearing a cross in class, convinced it was a symbol of oppression. But when Barron responded with calm logic and unwavering faith, the entire room was left stunned, and Taylor found herself facing questions she never expected. The sun streamed through the tall windows of the lecture hall, casting long shadows across rows of desks filled with eager college students. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the air buzzed with the energy of a new semester. The philosophy class, one of the most popular on campus, was known for its lively debates and thought-provoking discussions. Today's topic, however, promised to be especially contentious: the separation of church and state. The professor, Dr. Alan Whitaker, stood at the front of the room, his tweed jacket and bow tie giving him the air of an old-school academic. He was a man who thrived on intellectual sparring, often playing devil's advocate to push his students to think critically. "All right, class," he began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of teaching. "Today, we're diving into one of the most debated principles in American history, the role of religion in public life. Should it be celebrated, restricted, or perhaps eliminated altogether? Let's hear your thoughts." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices as students eagerly raised their hands. Among them was Taylor, a 19-year-old sophomore with dyed blue hair and a nose ring. Taylor was a self-proclaimed activist, known for her fiery speeches and unyielding commitment to progressive causes. Today, she wore a graphic tee that read, "No gods, no masters," paired with a denim jacket covered in pins advocating for various social justice movements. Taylor's hand shot up, and Dr. Whitaker nodded in her direction. "Taylor, go ahead." Taylor stood, her voice ringing with conviction. "Religion has no place in public life. It's outdated, oppressive, and exclusionary. The idea that we should allow religious symbols or practices in public spaces is a slap in the face to anyone who doesn't share those beliefs. It's time we move past these relics of the past and embrace a truly secular society." A murmur rippled through the room. Some students nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Near the back of the room, Barron Trump sat quietly, his tall frame making him an unmistakable presence. At 19, Barron was a freshman, new to the college experience, but already making an impression with his calm demeanor and sharp intellect. Dressed in a crisp white button-down shirt and dark jeans, he exuded a quiet confidence that set him apart from his peers. Around his neck hung a small silver cross, a subtle but unmistakable symbol of his faith. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious, but it caught the light as he shifted in his seat, drawing the attention of those around him. Taylor's eyes narrowed as she noticed the cross. "And speaking of religious symbols," she continued, her tone sharpening, "why are we still allowing things like that in academic spaces? It's exclusionary and sends a message that Christianity is somehow superior to other beliefs, or to no belief at all. It's a microaggression against non-Christians, and frankly, it doesn't belong here." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Barron, who remained calm, his expression unreadable. He could feel the weight of the moment, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers lightly brushing the cross around his neck, as if drawing strength from it. Dr. Whitaker, sensing the tension, stepped in. "Taylor raises an interesting point," he said, his tone measured. "But let's not make this personal. The question at hand is whether religious symbols and practices have a place in public or academic settings. Barron, would you like to respond?" Barron nodded, his voice steady and measured as he spoke. "Thank you, Professor. And thank you, Taylor, for sharing your perspective. I'd like to start by saying that the cross I wear isn't about imposing my beliefs on anyone. It's a personal expression of my faith, something that's deeply meaningful to me. And as far as I understand, The First Amendment protects my right to express that faith, just as it protects your right to criticize it." Taylor scoffed, crossing her arms. "The First Amendment? That's just an excuse people use to justify outdated, oppressive ideas. Religion has been used to justify some of the worst atrocities in history. Crusades, colonization, forced conversions. How can you wear that and not see the harm it represents to so many people?" Barron met Taylor's gaze, his expression calm but resolute. "I don't deny that religion has been misused in the past to justify terrible things. But that's not the whole story. Faith has also been a force for incredible good. Abolition, civil rights, charity, and community building. The cross I wear isn't a symbol of oppression. It's a reminder of hope, sacrifice, and the values that guide my life." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Barron's words hanging in the air. Some students nodded in agreement, while others exchanged thoughtful glances. Even Dr. Whitaker seemed impressed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Barron. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what do you think about Barron's response? We love hearing from patriots across America. But Taylor wasn't ready to back down. "That's easy for you to say," she shot back, her voice tinged with frustration. "You come from a place of privilege. People like you don't have to worry about being excluded or marginalized because of your beliefs. For the rest of us, symbols like that are a constant reminder of the power structures that keep us oppressed." Barron's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "I understand that not everyone shares my beliefs, and I respect that. But faith isn't about privilege. It's about humility. It's about recognizing that we're all equal in the eyes of God, regardless of our backgrounds. And that's why I believe in respecting everyone's right to express their beliefs, even if they're different from mine." The tension in the room was palpable. Taylor's face flushed with frustration, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another student raised their hand. "Professor," the student said, their voice hesitant but clear, "I think Barron has a point. If we start banning personal expressions like a cross, where does it stop? Would we ban hijabs or yarmulkes too? That doesn't seem fair." Another student chimed in. "Yeah, and isn't the whole point of the First Amendment to protect everyone's right to express themselves? If we start picking and choosing which symbols are acceptable, aren't we just creating more division?" Taylor looked around, realizing that the tide of the conversation was beginning to turn. The self-righteous confidence that had fueled her argument began to waver, replaced by a flicker of doubt. She glanced at Dr. Whitaker as if hoping for support, but the professor simply folded his arms and waited, his expression unreadable. Barron, sensing the shift, leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Taylor, I understand where you're coming from, and I agree that we need to be mindful of how our actions and symbols affect others. But I also believe that progress comes from understanding and respecting each other, even when we disagree. Silencing people or erasing their beliefs isn't the answer. The answer is dialogue, conversations like this one, where we can challenge each other and learn from each other." The room was quiet again, the weight of Barron's words settling over the class like a blanket. Even Taylor seemed momentarily at a loss for words, her earlier bravado replaced with a contemplative silence. Dr. Whitaker finally broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "Well said, Barron. And thank you, Taylor, for challenging us to think critically. This is exactly the kind of discussion I hoped we'd have today." As the students began packing up their things, a few approached Barron to thank him for his perspective. Even the professor gave him a nod of approval. Taylor, meanwhile, slipped out quietly, her earlier confidence replaced with a pensive expression. The stage was set, the tension had been built, and the conversation was far from over. Stay tuned to hear what comes up next. Do you really believe that? Taylor's voice cut through the hum of students packing up their belongings, stopping several in their tracks. She had paused near the door, her blue hair catching the light as she turned back to face Barron. Her tone was sharp, almost incredulous, as if she couldn't fathom how someone could hold such a perspective. Do you really think wearing that cross doesn't send a message? Because it does, and it's not the message you think. Barron, who had been slipping his notebook into his bag, looked up calmly. The room, which had been on the verge of dispersing, seemed to freeze. A few students lingered by their desks, their curiosity piqued. Even Dr. Whitaker leaned against his desk, arms crossed, clearly interested in where this was going. Taylor took a step forward, her voice rising with emotion. You talk about respect and dialogue, but symbols like that, she gestured toward the cross around Barron's neck, are a reminder of centuries of oppression. They're a reminder of forced conversions, of colonization, of people being told their beliefs weren't good enough. How can you wear that and claim it's just a personal expression? It's a symbol of power, and it's been used to silence people like me for generations. Barron stood, his tall frame towering over the desks around him, but his demeanor remained composed. He didn't rush to respond, instead taking a moment to consider her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was a quiet strength behind it. I understand why you feel that way, Taylor, he began, his tone respectful but firm. And I won't deny that there have been times in history when religion was misused to justify terrible things. But I think it's important to separate the actions of flawed people from the principles they claim to represent. The cross I wear isn't about power or oppression. It's about faith, hope, and the belief that we're all created equal in the eyes of God. Taylor crossed her arms, her frustration evident. That's easy for you to say. You've never been on the receiving end of that so-called faith. You've never had to fight to be seen or heard in a world that's built to cater to people like you. Barron's expression softened, but his gaze remained steady. You're right, he said simply. I've been blessed in many ways, and I won't pretend to understand every struggle you've faced. But faith isn't about catering to anyone. It's about humility. It's about recognizing that none of us are perfect, that we all have room to grow, and that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Taylor's eyes narrowed, her voice rising again. But that's the problem. You're using faith as a shield, as if it excuses the harm it's caused. You can't just ignore the history of what that symbol represents to so many people. Barron took a step closer, his voice calm but resolute. I'm not ignoring history, Taylor. I'm learning from it. And what I've learned is that faith has been a force for good as much as it's been misused. It inspired the abolition of slavery. It fueled the civil rights movement. It's the reason countless charities and hospitals exist today. The cross I wear isn't a symbol of oppression. It's a reminder of the values that guide me to try and make the world a better place. The room was silent again, the weight of Barron's words hanging in the air. A few students exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Even Dr. Whitaker seemed impressed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Barron. But Taylor wasn't ready to back down. That's just revisionist history, she shot back, her voice tinged with frustration. You're cherry-picking the good parts and ignoring the bad. Religion has been used to justify wars, discrimination, and countless other atrocities. How can you stand there and act like it's all sunshine and rainbows? Barron shook his head, his voice steady. I'm not saying it's all sunshine and rainbows. I'm saying it's complicated, just like people are complicated. We all have flaws, and we all make mistakes. But that doesn't mean we throw everything away. It means we learn from the past. We take what's good, and we work to make things better. Taylor opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another student spoke up. "I think Barron has a point," the student said, her voice hesitant but clear. "If we start banning personal expressions like a cross, where does it stop? Would we ban hijabs or yarmulkes too? That doesn't seem fair." Another student chimed in. "Yeah, and isn't the whole point of the First Amendment to protect everyone's right to express themselves? If we start picking and choosing which symbols are acceptable, aren't we just creating more division?" Taylor looked around, realizing that the tide of the conversation was beginning to turn. The self-righteous confidence that had fueled her argument began to waver, replaced by a flicker of doubt. She glanced at Dr. Whitaker as if hoping for support, but the professor simply folded his arms and waited, his expression unreadable. Barron, sensing the shift, leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Taylor, I understand where you're coming from, and I agree that we need to be mindful of how our actions and symbols affect others. But I also believe that progress comes from understanding and respecting each other even when we disagree. Silencing people or erasing their beliefs isn't the answer. The answer is dialogue, conversations like this one, where we can challenge each other and learn from each other." Taylor's face flushed with frustration, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Dr. Whitaker stepped in. "Well said, Barron," he said, his voice thoughtful. "And thank you, Taylor, for challenging us to think critically. This is exactly the kind of discussion I hoped we'd have today." The professor's words seemed to deflate the tension in the room. Students began packing up their things, the hum of conversation gradually returning. A few approached Barron to thank him for his perspective, their expressions a mix of admiration and respect. Even Dr. Whitaker gave him a nod of approval. Taylor, meanwhile, lingered near the door, her earlier confidence replaced with a pensive expression. She glanced back at Barron one last time before slipping out of the room, her mind clearly racing with thoughts she hadn't expected to confront. The confrontation had ended, but the impact of the discussion lingered. Barron's calm, logical defense of his beliefs had not only shifted the tone of the conversation, but had also planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those who had been quick to judge. The stage was set for the next chapter, where the lessons of the day would continue to unfold. The sun was beginning to set as Barron walked across campus later that evening, the crisp autumn air carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. The events of the day replayed in his mind, but he felt no sense of triumph. For him, the discussion in class wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing firm in his beliefs while respecting others. He had hoped that his words had planted a seed, not just in Taylor, but in everyone who had been listening. As he approached the library, a familiar voice called out behind him, "Barron, wait." He turned to see Taylor jogging to catch up, her blue hair slightly disheveled and her denim jacket pulled tight against the cool breeze. Her expression was different now, less combative, more uncertain. She slowed as she reached him, her hands shoved into her jacket pockets. "Hey," she said, her voice quieter than it had been in class. "Do you have a minute?" Barron nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Taylor hesitated, glancing down at the ground before meeting his gaze. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about faith and history, and I don't know, I guess I just didn't expect you to have such a thoughtful response." Barron smiled faintly. "I think a lot of people assume that if someone holds traditional values, they must not have thought them through. But I've spent a lot of time considering what I believe and why. It's important to me to understand my faith, not just follow it blindly." Taylor nodded slowly, her expression conflicted. I still don't agree with everything you said. I mean, I've seen how religion has been used to hurt people, to justify discrimination. But I guess I never really thought about the good it's done, too. You mentioned the civil rights movement, and I looked it up after class. I didn't realize how much faith played a role in that. Barron's smile widened slightly. It's true. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor, and his faith was a driving force behind his work for justice and equality. Faith can be a powerful motivator for positive change when it's rooted in love and compassion. Taylor shifted uncomfortably, as if grappling with thoughts she wasn't used to entertaining. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry if I came across as hostile earlier. I just get so frustrated sometimes, you know? It feels like there's so much wrong in the world, and I don't always know how to fix it. Barron's expression softened. I understand. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when you're passionate about making a difference. But I've found that real change starts with listening and understanding, even when it's hard. That's how we build bridges instead of walls. Taylor looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. Maybe you're right. I don't know. But I'd like to keep talking about it, if you're open to that. Barron gestured toward the library. I'm always open to a good conversation. Want to grab a coffee and keep talking? Taylor hesitated, then smiled faintly. Yeah, I'd like that. The next day, the philosophy class was abuzz with chatter about the previous discussion. Students who had been silent during the debate now shared their thoughts, some expressing newfound respect for Barron's perspective, others admitting they had never considered the nuances of the issue before. Even Dr. Whitaker seemed energized by the impact the conversation had had on his students. Taylor, meanwhile, sat quietly in her seat, her usual fiery demeanor replaced with a thoughtful calm. She glanced at Barron, who was reviewing his notes, and gave him a small nod. He returned the gesture, understanding that while they might not agree on everything, they had found common ground in their willingness to engage with each other. Later that week, Taylor approached Barron after class with a notebook in hand. I've been doing some research, she said, her tone more curious than confrontational, about what you said in class. I still have questions, but I think I'm starting to see where you're coming from. Barron smiled, his voice warm. I'm glad to hear that. Questions are a good place to start. Let's keep the conversation going. And so they did. Over the weeks that followed, Barron and Taylor continued to talk, their debates evolving from heated arguments to thoughtful discussions. They didn't always agree, but they learned to respect each other's perspectives and to find value in their differences. For Barron, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of dialogue and the importance of standing firm in his values while remaining open to others. For Taylor, it was a lesson in humility and the realization that understanding someone else's beliefs didn't mean compromising her own. In the end, the cross around Barron's neck became more than just a symbol of his faith. It became a reminder of the conversation that had brought two very different people together. And in a world that often felt divided, that was a victory worth celebrating. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and let us know where in America you're watching from. What do you think about Barron's response? Was he right to stand his ground, or is there more to the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below.